Moms who know do less so they can focus on what matters most, taking care of themselves, their families, and living their God-given purpose. Moms who know focus on the little things they can do that grow to have a huge impact. You are connecting with your family, your true self, and your God-given purpose. You are a mom who knows. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanelle Nielsen, and I'm joined today by my husband, James, for this episode of Couples Who Know. So today we're going to talk about magic words in marriage and some things that you can say and certain phrases that you can use that are really going to help you to get on the same page as your partner. They're going to help you to communicate more clearly and just really help things go smoother.
I am really excited about this one because there are really some magic words out there that you can say in your marriage to help things go smoother, like Chanelle was saying.
All right, so before we dive into that, we just want to thank today's show sponsor, Moo2 Systems, for sponsoring this month's episodes. And if you haven't heard me talk about them yet, Moo2 is just a really great way for moms to get back their post-baby pelvic floor. And that is true whether your baby was born last week or last year or several years ago. Sometimes we just need a little bit of help to strengthen that pelvic floor and core area. And what I've found from really using Moo2 systems is that not only does it help with the sneeze pee issue and those kind of things, it also helps to strengthen your core and give you more energy and strength throughout your day, because your core really is your power center. And when you can kind of get your alignment right and adjust the way that you are holding yourself every day, it's going to make such a huge difference in your energy level. So go and check that out. You can get more details at bit.ly/Moo2Mama. That's bit.ly/MUTU MAMA. And thank you again to Moo2 for sponsoring the shows this month. Now let's go ahead and get started with magic words in marriage. And we're going to start off with this idea that our language really shapes our reality. I listened to a TED Talk by Lara Borditsky, and she talked about a group of people, they're Aborigines in Australia, and the way that they instruct people and kind of tell people how to go, they don't have the words left or right. So where we would say turn left or turn right, they say turn west or turn east. But not only that, even more specifically with directions, if a cup is over to their side, they would say, move your cup to the right, they say, move your cup to the northeast a little bit. Or another example she used was, oh, there's an ant on your southwest leg.
You would be really having a big struggle, I think, here.
Wouldn't
because
I?
I don't know that you know your north and south.
I really don't, but she brought up such an interesting point in this TED Talk, which is even young children in their society, even 5-year-old kids know their directions. They know north, east, south, west because it's used in their everyday language.
Mm-hmm.
And it is such an interesting thing that James brings up. I hardly know left and right, let alone north, south, east, and west. I certainly don't know that. And I think a lot of us really don't have maybe that internal mapping. But because these people have that language, it orients their world, and they use that language so frequently that they know it really shapes their reality. And so it's a really interesting thing when you then think about in your marriage, in your family, in your relationships, what you say and the words that you say really matter, because it can change kind of how you interact as a couple, and it can change the way that you feel about each other. Any thoughts on that before I dive in?
No, I love that. I think that exactly what you're saying is so true. And it's a neat thought. It's very cool.
All right, cool. Well, we have a few phrases that we're going to talk about. So number one, the first one is, how can I help? This is a powerful phrase if your spouse ever asks you this question, how can I help? And one time that this came up for me, I remember, is our son, Trevor, had gotten sick. And he was probably 5 or 6 at the time. And for whatever reason, he hadn't thrown up a lot in his life and didn't have a lot of experience with throwing up. And it was almost like he did not know what was happening to him. And so he threw up all down the hall. I mean, here and there and everywhere. And he's just throwing up everywhere. And he like, get in one spot, please, to the bathroom, and he kind of couldn't contain it, didn't know what was going on. And James walks into this situation and sees Trevor and me trying to,
The barf trail.
yeah, basically,
bad.
and me trying to like hold it all together and get him. And he just said, how can I help? And that's such a fantastic question, because it says, this isn't your problem alone. I'm on the same page as you. You're already here. I want to jump in and help you. What's the best way to do that? Another way you can phrase this is, would it help if I took the kid and put him in the shower, or would it help if I cleaned up the floor? Like, what do you want me to do here? And it's a really powerful way to kind of problem solve as a team. And when I was thinking about this question, it's really a lot different than what we sometimes say, or sometimes even hear ourselves, we hear other people say to us, is, let me know if you need anything. And that is so empty, right? Where it's a much more powerful thing to say, how can I help? Not just like, oh yeah, if you want it, I can help. No, how can I help and what can I do? Another way that this comes up is sometimes if I'm making dinner and, dinner is running late, or there's just been a lot of things, there have been things going on, and James will come in and say, okay, what can I do to help with dinner? Awesome. Here's what you can do. And then I can tell him. And I think this is true for both men and women, but I really feel like, especially as the mom, you have so many things just on your plate and on your mind all the time, this mental load, and when someone comes to you and says, I see that, and how can I help get that load off of you? That feels amazing.
I've had it done to me too, when you've said that, and it's almost like a validation, right? Like they recognize that I'm in a spot where, yeah, some help is needed, and they recognize I'm going through something. It's just this validating, I want to help you, and it's a connection. It's almost an instant connection, and it is magical. So I love that. So I would like to oh, please.
Before
yes,
you
yes,
go on,
yeah.
I just really also feel like sometimes husbands can get in trouble too when they say this a different way, and maybe wives, but like, I can just imagine if I've got a kid crying and clinging to my leg and I'm trying to stir something hot on the stove and the phone's ringing and all this is going on. And if James were to come to me and say, do you need any help? Yes, I need help, where it's almost like, that is like the final straw, that question. But to say, how can I help, is just a little bit different, and it's magic.
There's also some magic without words here too, because sometimes you can just jump in and start helping.
True.
Right? But sometimes, you're not sure the best way to do that, and it's good to verbalize, how can I help? But yeah, don't forget that there is always opportunity to just jump in and help, and that says a lot without saying anything. I want to talk about a phrase that we have been taught from a very, very young age, and it is, I'm sorry. Those are the magic words, right? And they are magical. I'd like to think that over time I've gotten better at learning how to apologize. I'm thinking of our 3-year-old right now, and we're trying to teach him how to say sorry. And what's so hilarious, you know where I'm going to go, right? So he'll have done something naughty or something that, needs, we point out that that's not okay. And he says, I forgive you. And it's just so funny because that connection for him is not quite there yet. And we'll give him the look and he says, I forgive you, when he should be saying, I'm sorry. But I was thinking about...
colors with a marker, like permanent marker on the wall. I forgive you. Like, wait, that is not the right phrase.
But what's so important to recognize is that he understands that forgiveness comes as a result of saying I'm sorry. Like he
He knows they're
realizes that they're
connected.
connected. And that's what stands out to me in my mind. Those things are interconnected, and it is so important. So, but I'll talk about first this concept of I'm sorry and learning how to apologize. It's sometimes really hard. I don't know, maybe it depends on your personality, but I think that if you're that type of person that just wants to be right or likes to be right, that can be very difficult to say sorry. I mean, nobody likes admitting they're wrong. I guess the majority of us don't. But anyway, I think that those are powerful things to say, and it can really mend very quickly. So, Chanel's taught me a little bit about how to apologize. And really, it's important to explain why you're sorry. And I learned that early on in our marriage. I'd be like, well, sorry. And she'd be like, well, do you know why you're sorry? Why are you sorry? And I'd be like, oh, I have to use my words. I have to explain why I'm sorry. But really, it's helped me to not do it again. Because if I'm going to explain why I'm sorry, it's going to help me really have this introspect of, hey, I've done something wrong here. And why do I realize that it's wrong? And then having your partner hear you say that, I think really helps them to forgive. And it helps you not to do it again. So that's one aspect of some magic behind I'm sorry. Recently, something that was very powerful in our marriage, an example I should say of when Chanelle apologized. We're raising teenagers, and it's tough. And those of you that have been there know it. And we're learning very quickly here with teenagers. But anyway, there was a situation where Chanelle recently said, I'm sorry for undermining you in front of the kids. That was not my intention. And that made me feel really good, especially because there was some history behind it to where that just meant a lot to me, because sometimes the kids think like, oh, well, you're just going to do what mom says or blah, blah, blah. And, we were working on that together. In this specific case, it was not a big deal. She didn't do anything terrible to undermine me. And I didn't even really feel like that. But to hear her say that she was aware of that really made me feel good. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in this particular instance, I just said something and the kids kind of took it wrong.
Mm.
And then they jumped on the boat of like, oh, yeah, well, this and this. And it even though that wasn't how I meant it at all, it just then was turned into like a gripe against dad fest. And I felt like, oh man, I put him in this situation instead of building him up. Now, I was really sorry to have put us all in that situation. And sometimes you don't know, because teenagers are volatile and you never know what's going to set them off. And that was kind of the deal with this situation. But I did apologize because I felt bad that I had even opened the door for that to happen.
Well, anyway, that was great. It did. It made me feel understood. So good on you. There's something else I wanted to share to you that I've learned about being sorry. We can't really think of an apology as winning or losing. You don't win if you apologize. You don't lose if you apologize. And it's also important to be sincere, and to take full responsibility for what you're sorry for. So those are kind of some things that I've learned along the way about being sorry, and really saying you're sorry is magic.
Yeah, I like that idea of it's not like a win or a lose to apologize, because sometimes I think there's almost that idea in our society that if if you are saying sorry, that you lost this one. And really, I'm sorry is just a relationship strengthening tool is what it comes down
For
to.
sure.
It's a humility kind of thing. Okay, I'm humble enough to recognize I am not perfect, and I'm going to tell that to my spouse so that we can be stronger as a couple. So I think that's a great one. Number 3 is I respect you. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, how important, especially it is for men to hear this, but I think for women too. Now, as I was thinking about this one, even though the words I respect you are super important, they can be hard to say just in normal conversation. It's not hard to say in the same way I'm sorry is hard to say. It's hard to say, like, you don't walk up to someone and say, hey, I respect you. It just sounds weird, right? So, what we might say instead that has kind of the same meaning is we might say, oh, that was so impressive the way you handled that. Or I really like how you just took care of that situation, or those kind of things where we point out things that we respect about them. Another way that we can do this is to acknowledge character traits, things that we see in them. I really respect what a great leader you are, or something like that is kind of an easier way to say it than I respect you. And again, like we've talked about on a previous episode, you can write it down. It can be helpful to write a note and say, I respect you so much. And that can come, that those words seem to flow a little bit easier written. So, really finding ways to incorporate this idea of respect, if not the actual phrase, is a really powerful thing for your marriage. But as much as possible, to let your spouse know that you respect them is a powerful and magical phrase that you can use.
Perfect. So number 4, these are some really great words, and I think a lot of us like hearing it, and that is, you're right. Um, I like being told I'm right. I don't know, sometimes, but you have to mean it. You can't just go around always saying you're right, especially when your spouse is not right. So don't get me wrong. Um, Another way that you can say this is, I think that you've made a really good point, or what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So I like it when Chanelle will bring me a concern, and she'll really truly want to hear what I have to say, and I'll do my best to give her some advice. And she'll say, yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And that's just a primer for me, like, okay, like she's listening to me, and I want to really try hard to say some things that will be valuable and help her, because I want to help her. But it just makes the other person feel so good, when you feel like what they're saying is something they want to listen to. So you're right. It builds unity. It gets you on the same page, and really is something that can, again, create that instant connection with, okay, like I want to even be around this person. They're listening to me, and they're agreeing with what I say. Again, with the caution there, like, you're not going to just always throw that around. Hey, yeah, you're right, when you don't feel like it. But again, there's some power there.
I think another way to use that one is kind of where I thought you were going to go with this one, honestly, is, when you've had a disagreement and you come to change your mind, or you've had a disagreement and then you realize you were in error, and to then say you're right takes a lot of humility. And sometimes when we're stubborn and we don't want to admit that could have ever possibly been wrong, it's easier to just kind of, play it off, walk away, that kind of thing. But to come out and be the bigger person and to admit your mistakes, and then to say to your spouse, you were right and I was
Oh, that
wrong.
even holds a little more weight, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really hard one to do, but it just again goes back to that whole idea of this is about our relationship. It's not about winning or losing.
Another thing too is when you're in this situation where you've got kids and everything, and you say it in front of them,
Mm.
like, you know what, mom's right, guys, like, we really need to listen. What she's saying makes a lot of sense. And so again, that validation, that building each other up in front of the kids, that just helps, I think, the whole family. Or even doing it to your children. Wow, like, Kyle, really great idea. I can't believe you thought of that. You're right, we should try to do this. One thing, I'll never forget this story. It stood out to me so much. It was before I was driving. I was probably 14, and we have this big hill by our house, and it's a long hill. We called it Michigan. And you go down this hill, and my mom would always pump her brakes as she went down the hill. And I go, Mom, why? Because it was like a hard pump, you know? So we would be like, picture you're going down this hill. It's like this roller coaster and it's like jerking, you know, going down this hill. And I'd be like, Mom, why are you doing that? And she's like, well, because this helps save the brakes. And me in my teenager ways, I'm like, no, it doesn't. That's ridiculous. Don't do that. That's just going to be harder on the brakes. And she was annoyed and didn't say anything. But the next day, I don't know, I guess she looked it up or asked somebody. She came to me and said, hey, James, what you said the other day when we were in the car about the brakes, you're right.
Hmm.
You shouldn't pump them like I was doing. And I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, like, wow. My mom listened to me. Like, that's so cool. And I didn't even know if I was 100% right. I was just probably being a cocky teenager. But she was humble enough to say, okay, maybe I can change something. And then she came back to me and said, hey, you were right. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to pump the brakes going down the hill like that. You were right that it's hard on the brakes. So, and she thanked me. And I was totally blown away. And I haven't forgotten it since.
That's a great story. And yeah, that experience of having someone come to you and saying that you're right, it just like you just feel like, oh, I guess because it's them being so vulnerable and putting themselves
Sure.
out there, and then that connects you. That vulnerability is something that connects. So the next one is the idea of checking in, and this is something we've kind of learned the hard way. So maybe you guys have had the same experience where you say, "Do you want to go out for Chinese food tonight?" And then your spouse is like, "Okay," and then you go there, and you're looking at the food and both of you are thinking, man, I didn't really want Chinese. And then you finally, someone says, this doesn't even look that good. Wait, you were the one who wanted to come here. You were the one who wanted to come here. And you kind of, neither one of you really wanted to be there. And if you think back to that exchange, do you want to go to Chinese? It was a question, right? And we've had similar things that have happened where we get in this scenario that neither one of us really wanted. And so, one way that we have done, one thing we've used to combat this, some words that we use are how much do you want that flavor of ice cream? How much do you want, that type of food or this kind of activity or whatever? And we like to use a scale of 1 to 10. So, how much do you want that on a scale of 1 to 10? And kind of having this specific way of checking in has been really valuable for us to understand where our spouse is at. And sometimes it's the other way. It's that someone really wants something and the other person is like, I could go either way. And it's just a really helpful gauge to help you know what matters to your spouse so that then you can kind of react to that appropriately and really know what's important.
But I was going to say, it's really cool, right? To have that, because then if it's not that big of a deal to you, but it's a big deal to your
Yeah.
spouse, like, wow, then why not? And that would make them so happy. And now you know it will make them happy. Great, go for it.
Well, and what happens sometimes is that you think, oh, my spouse really wants this, so I'm going to take one for the team,
Exactly,
but they
exactly.
didn't really want it at all.
Yeah,
Like, so
yeah.
that's why it's been helpful because you want to know how maybe you really don't want to go somewhere and your spouse, they kind of want to go. And that's a time when maybe you lean towards not going, but you have to know that to make that informed decision. And on the flip side of this, it also, how much do you want to do whatever the activity is? If you don't want to do it, it's important to say, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not interested. And to be really clear, and that's the whole idea of this 1 to 10 scale is allowing you to be clear.
So I want to throw one to you. So what if I'm like a 1 or a 2 and you're a 9 or a 10 on something?
Yeah.
Tell me some things that maybe if you could think of any that we've done to help.
Yeah.
get around it.
I mean, that does happen sometimes, right? And so then it's like more discussion. Well, do we both have to go to a certain activity? Can we divide and conquer?
Yeah,
Or,
that's
you
happened.
know, if it's food, if, you know, you're a 1 or a 2 for Indian food and I'm a 10, always a 10 because Indian food is the best, then maybe it's back to the drawing board, something that we're both, you know, we're both a 5 or a 6 for or whatever. Um, so those are the things that kind of come to
No, that's
mind.
perfect. I put you on the spot. I think that's good. And I think where that's been the case before, it's like, hey, well, what if we get Indian this weekend and then the next, like your choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
But just finding a way to work it out and to really know where the other person is at.
Okay, so just to recap, these are our tips for magic words. So the first was, how can I help? Remembering that there's a lot of power in that phrase of how can I help? And 2, I'm sorry, and being sincere when you're sorry. The third was, I respect you, and maybe finding different ways to say that, such as, that's so impressive that you are such an awesome podcaster, that I'll say to my wife. And 4, you're right, or saying something like, that makes a lot of sense. 5 is the check-in, and that was what we do with our scale. How much do you want to do that? Helping with getting you on the same page. So those are the top 5 we have for you.
Yeah. So all of these 5 are really ways to just orient your language and really make sure that your language is matching up with the kind of relationship that you want to have. And we've found that these particular phrases are so helpful just to be really clear with each other, to know what the other person wants, and to be humble and to have better communication. So we hope these have been helpful for you. We would love to know what one little thing you are going to do differently because of what you've heard today. Let us know on Facebook or Instagram at Moms Who Know Podcast. And if you like this episode, be sure to share it. Tell your spouse what one little thing you are going to start using in your vocabulary and in your conversations. That's a powerful way to share this show. We want to again thank our sponsor, Mutu Systems, for being a part of the show and for sharing their system with us. You can get all the details at bit.ly/Mutu Mama. bit.ly/MUTUMAMA. And thank you for being here. We'll see you next week on Moms Who Know.